Snow drifted over Ravenshire Hall like a silent veil in the winter of 1848, blanketing the gardens and marble figures with a purity that felt almost ironic. Clara Whitcomb paused before the great double doors of the main hall. Her fingers, cold as the wind, held tightly to Oliver's small, warm hand, one fragile point of life against all that frozen stillness. Beyond the wooden panels, violins shimmered beneath muted laughter, yet outside the world seemed to hold its breath, as if fearing what was about to unfold. Clara inhaled. The sharp air burned her throat, but it was the memory of what had come before that bent her posture for a fleeting moment. She adjusted her dark widow's dress, somber though less rigid than society would forgive, and felt the weight of every gaze she was bound to meet. Her red hair, disciplined into place, exposed a nape far too vulnerable for a woman who had survived so much. Beside her, Oliver watched her with a hopeful innocence, his brown eyes shining beneath the corridor's pale light. "Is it beautiful in there?" he whispered, as if afraid to disturb the hush of winter. Clara knelt to straighten the boy's coat, letting the simple gesture linger a heartbeat longer than needed, as if she could shield not only his small body, but her own wavering courage. "Yes, darling, very beautiful." But when she rose and pushed the doors open, beauty was not what greeted her. It was weight. The hall unfurled before them like a living painting, shimmering silks, impeccable gentlemen, the soft glow of candlelight caught in crystal. At the far end, a towering Christmas tree stood as a solemn witness to the night. And the moment Clara crossed the threshold, the collective murmur faltered. A musician missed a note, a glass chimed offbeat, and then silence spread through the room like a cold breath. One by one, faces turned toward her. Clara felt each stare land upon her, like unseen hands trying to drag her back toward a past she had never wished to revisit. Her heart hammered in her ears. And that was when she saw him. At the center of the hall, motionless between light and shadow, stood Christian Ravenshire. 30 years old, posture faultless, eyes the shade of green that had always seemed to see more than they should. Yet in that instant, something in him fractured, too subtle for most, unmistakable to her. He recognized her, the woman whose death had been mourned, and believed final. If you too cherish period stories, those that whisper like old letters and echo like longing hearts, leave your like and subscribe to the Countess's Tales. Your support allows these narratives to cross oceans and reach more souls around the world. And before you go, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. It's always enchanting to discover how far our stories travel. Clara Whitcomb had vanished 5 years earlier, not into the ordinary fog of an English morning, but into the twisted wreckage of a derailed train between London and Bristol, a catastrophe that filled the newspapers for weeks with lists of the dead, the wounded, and the unconfirmed. Society, always eager for the path of least resistance, rushed to declare her dead when no body was ever identified as hers. Mourning her was far more convenient than considering any alternative that might hint at scandal. Christian Ravenshire had refused to accept it. He travelled along country roads and through small villages near the crash site. He spoke with survivors, physicians, engineers. He offered rewards, pressed for answers against reason itself, and ignored those who told him day after day that hope was pointless. Yet nothing surfaced, no trace, no whisper, not even the faintest thread he could follow. And when he finally ended the search, that quiet surrender became, in its own way, the confession of a feeling he had never dared to name, that he had loved her from the first ball where he saw her, when she was nothing more than the forgotten baronet's daughter, and he the Duke's second son destined to live in the margins. Then his brother died. Christian inherited the title, the duties, the weight of a noble name, and the love he had never spoken seemed to be buried with Clara. Now, though, the dead had taken shape. She was there, alive, and holding the hand of a child. And Christian Ravenshire, Duke of Ravenshire, had just watched her step through the glowing doors of the Christmas ball with the stunned disbelief of a man facing a ghost that refuses to remain in its grave, one whose return threatens to unearth everything he himself had tried to lay to rest. Chapter 1. The apparition. Clara didn't move, not because she refused to, but because her legs threatened to give way, forcing her to stand even straighter, as if her spine itself had become armor. Oliver's hand gripped hers with a strength far too great for such a small boy, as though he sensed in that instinctive way children do, that something immense was about to crash down upon them. The hall remained silent, a living silence, heavy and watchful, filled with eyes studying her, as if she were some indecent marvel. She recognized many of those faces. Some had danced with her. Others had dismissed her with society's polished indifference. All of them, however, had buried her. And now they stared as she breathed, an error the world had somehow forgotten to correct. Christian still had not moved. He stood at the center of the room, his glass suspended mid-air. His green eyes fixed on her with a force Clara felt cut through the distance, the silence, and the 5 years separating what had been from what now was. He was thinner, harder, his jaw set, his shoulders rigid beneath the perfect lines of his dark coat. He was no longer the almost carefree second son she remembered. He was the Duke, and the title had exacted its price. "Mama Clara?" Oliver tugged at her sleeve, his voice soft and trembling. Clara forced her lips into a smile, leaning toward him, if only to look away from Christian for a single heartbeat. "It's all right, sweetheart. We're together." And because she needed it to be true, she allowed herself to believe it, just for that breath. Then she took the first step. It was as if the entire hall woke from a spell. Whispers burst open. A lady released a muffled cry. A gentleman dropped his glass, the shattering of crystal splitting the silence like a whip. People stepped aside, clearing a path, not out of courtesy, but out of shock. Clara walked through that human corridor, with her head held high, each step a refusal to shrink, to flee, to apologize for being alive. Oliver stayed pressed against her side, his wide brown eyes searching every face, his small, sweaty hand clinging to hers like an anchor in a storm. Then Christian moved. He handed his glass to someone, Clara didn't register who, and began walking toward them. Each footfall echoed against the marble. He didn't rush, he didn't falter. He simply advanced, with the same cold determination she remembered from moments when he had made decisions he would never retreat from. When he stopped before her only a few steps away, the world seemed to contract until nothing existed but the space between them. "Clara!" His voice was low, controlled, but there was a faint tremor at the edge of it. She lifted her chin. "Your Grace." He flinched, barely, but she saw it. A title that had once been mere formality now stood as a wall. His gaze traced her features, the red hair pinned in quiet restraint, the paler skin, the fine lines grief had carved around her mouth. And inevitably, his eyes dropped to the boy at her side. "Who is he?" Christian asked, in a tension-softened calm that felt more dangerous than any shout. Clara drew a steady breath. "Oliver Merrick, my stepson." The word fell between them like a stone breaking still water. Christian blinked once, then again. Something shifted in his expression, something small but sharp enough to make Clara wish she could step back. "Stepson," he repeated, weighing the reach of the word. "So you married?" It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. Clara felt her throat tighten. "Yes." "With whom?" "Hugh Merrick, a gentleman from Gloucestershire." Her voice held until the final syllable. "He passed away 3 months ago." Christian didn't answer at once. He merely stood there, rigid, those green eyes fixed on her with a heat that stung. And Clara understood with an ache like a blow to the chest that he had not asked where she had been, nor how she had survived, nor what had happened after the wreck that the world believed had killed her. He had asked only about the marriage, as if, among all wounds, that one was the deepest. "Christian," she began, but her voice broke. He raised a hand, stopping her. "No, not here." He turned toward the onlookers, his chin lifted. His voice rang through the hall, firm, aristocratic, impossible to defy. "The celebration continues. Music." For a breath, no one moved, as if the entire gathering braced against the command. Then the orchestra resumed its melody, hesitant at first, then fuller. Conversation returned, fevered, hushed. No one approached Clara. No one dared. Christian looked back at her. "Come with me." Not an invitation, a command dressed as courtesy. Clara looked to Oliver. He clung to her skirt, eyes enormous. She wanted to refuse, wanted to turn and slip through that sea of stairs and vanish once more. But Hugh's will, the promise made at his deathbed, the obligation to protect Oliver, everything rooted her to that place. She nodded. Christian turned and walked. Clara followed, Oliver beside her, the boy's hand gripping hers like it was the only solid thing he had. They crossed the overheated hall beneath 100 stairs, passed through side doors, and entered a corridor lit by candles that flickered with each passing draught. Christian did not look back. He did not speak. He simply walked, fast, tense, until he stopped before a heavy oak door. He opened it without ceremony. Clara stepped inside. It was a library, shelves rising to the ceiling, leather-bound volumes, a fire burning low and steady, casting moving shadows across the walls. The scent of paper, smoke and warm wax was strangely familiar, as if the room remembered her better than the people outside. Christian closed the door behind them. The thud echoed like a verdict. He turned, and for the first time since the hall, the mask slipped. 5 years. His voice was raw, almost broken. 5 years, Clara. We all thought you died in that wreck. Clara shut her eyes for a moment. The metallic scream, the roar of the train leaving the tracks, the stench of smoke and twisted iron surged back so vividly her hands trembled. "I know," she whispered. "I saw the headlines. Too late." I searched. His interruption was sharp, frayed. I walked that cursed rail line. I spoke with survivors, with doctors, with men who knew nothing at all. It was as if you had vanished into the air. Clara opened her eyes, tears burning hot. He had searched. She hadn't known. No one had told her. "And then I stopped," he went on, raking a hand through his hair, unraveling the polish of his noble composure. "Because everyone kept saying it was hopeless, that you were dead. And I—" His voice caught, just for a heartbeat. "I almost believed them." He turned toward her. His green eyes shone with something fierce and wounding. "But you weren't dead, Clara. You were alive. And you married." The accusation reverberated through the library's paneled walls. Drained, still carrying the weight of that hall and the burden of 5 silent years, she didn't try to soften the truth. "I survived, Christian." Her voice was quiet, steady. "I walked away from that wreck without knowing who I was. I wandered for days. I couldn't remember my name or where to return. I only kept going until I collapsed somewhere from pain and exhaustion, and someone found me." His jaw tightened. Hugh Merrick. He had heard the name before. A railway investor. "Yes," her voice gentled at the sound of it. "He took me into his home. He cared for me when I had no one left." "You had me." The eruption was so sudden, Clara stepped back. Oliver shrank behind her skirt, clutching the fabric. "If you had sent a letter, a note, any sign, I would have come for you. I would have—" He stopped, breath jagged. Turned away, bracing his hands on the mantelpiece as if he needed its strength to stand. Clara's tears finally fell. "When my memory returned," she said, her voice shaking, "you were already a duke. Your brother was gone. I was officially a dead woman, a daughter without a name. Hugh was ill. Oliver needed someone. And I didn't know how to return without igniting a scandal that would destroy everything." Christian looked at her for a long moment. The pain in his eyes was so bare she could hardly breathe. "You couldn't come back to me," he said quietly, "but you could marry another." The silence that followed felt as long as winter itself. There was no simple answer, because the truth was made of layers. She had loved him. She still loved him. She had returned not for him, but for a child she could not abandon, and reclaiming her name in this house meant awakening a past society had preferred to bury. Slowly, something in him closed. It was like watching a door lock from the inside. "Very well," he said at last. He walked to the door and opened it, though he did not yet leave. "You will remain here, at Ravenshire Hall, until I understand what happened." Clara's eyes widened. "I can't." "You can, and you will." His voice hardened. "Because if you walk out now, society will crush you, and that boy as well. You know that as clearly as I do." He was right. Clara knew he was right, and the fact that he was only made it easier to resent him. Christian stepped out. The door closed behind him with a sharp, final click. Oliver, still clutching her skirt, looked up with frightened brown eyes. Clara knelt, gathered him into her arms, and that was how she finally broke, her face buried in the hair of the boy who was hers, not by blood but by choice. Her tears fell silently, soaking his coat while the fire crackled softly, and the books kept their quiet watch over 5 lost years. No one in that house truly understood. Chapter 2. The Living Ghost. Christian closed the library door and rested his forehead against the cold wood. His hands trembled. He curled them into fists until the ache offered some anchor. He needed to breathe, to reclaim the composure that had abandoned him the moment she crossed the ballroom's threshold. Clara Whitcomb. Alive. Here. With the red hair he had never forgotten, the blue eyes that had haunted him for 5 years, and a child holding her hand with the trust of someone who already knows where safety lies. He straightened slowly, dragged a hand across his face, trying to force the Duke's impassive mask back into place. But beneath it something burned, anger, relief, hurt, a fierce, long-buried feeling he had never dared to name, now threatening to break through every careful line of control he had built since inheriting the title. "I survived. I walked away from that train and didn't know who I was." Her words pulsed in his mind. Christian shut his eyes. The wreck returned in brutal clarity. The smoking ruin between London and Bristol, the iron and coal stench, bodies covered with canvas, the low moans of survivors pulled from the chaos. He had arrived 2 days later. Too late to find her alive. Too early to accept she was dead. He had spent weeks searching hospitals, infirmaries, muddy fields, and forgotten villages. He paid for information, begged for names, questioned every red-haired woman someone thought might resemble her. Nothing. No blue-eyed stranger, no faint trail. Then came the final list. Miss Clara Whitcomb, presumed dead. He remembered the paper crumpling in his fist, the dry sound as it tore, the flames consuming her name in the very fireplace where he had just lost his voice. But most of all he remembered the feeling, something breaking inside him, silent and irreparable. Not long after, his brother fell ill. A few short weeks later, he was gone. And Christian, who had never wished to be a duke, became one. "Your Grace?" Hartwell's voice cut through the memory. Christian turned too sharply. "What is it?" Hartwell, who had served the Ravenshire family longer than Christian had been alive, remained unshaken. "The guests are asking whether they should remain." Christian glanced toward the corridor leading to the hall. The music wavered, the whispers were ravenous. Clara Whitcomb's reappearance, presumed dead, now a widow, arriving with a child, was a story that could devour every corner of society. "They may stay," he said, voice like ice. "The celebration continues." Hartwell nodded but did not step away. "And what of Mrs. Merrick?" Mrs. Merrick. The wrong name scraped like grit against his tongue. "Prepare the blue room for her and the boy." "It is already prepared, Your Grace." Christian almost smiled. Hartwell anticipated needs before they were spoken. "Thank you." The butler departed. Christian remained. He should return to the party, wear the Duke's mask, smile, dance, perform. But he couldn't. Everything inside him felt misaligned. Clara was alive, and he didn't know whether he wanted to pull her into his arms or demand every truth she had kept hidden. "I walked for days, until someone found me." His fists tightened, nails biting into his palms. She had wandered alone, injured, nameless, while he searched in the wrong place. While he offered rewards along the wrecked railway line, she was walking through the countryside of Gloucestershire, and Hugh Merrick, a name meaningless until tonight, had found her, cared for her, married her, and Christian, despite all his searching, had lost her. He returned to the hall. Conversation died at once, but he ignored it. He crossed to the Christmas tree, took a glass from a footman's tray and drank deeply. The wine burned, but the knot in his throat remained. "Your Grace!" The gentle, measured voice came from behind him. He turned. Lady Dorothea Sinclair approached, wrapped in emerald silk, her blonde curls arranged with flawless precision. Her smile was immaculate, half invitation, half social blade. Daughter of a marquess, refined, beautiful, perfectly suitable for a duke. She had shown interest in him these past months. He had never encouraged her, but he had never discouraged her either. There had been no reason to, until tonight. "Lady Dorothea," he greeted, polite. "It has been quite an evening," she said, weighing each word. "The appearance of Miss Whitcomb, or shall I say Mrs. Merrick?" Christian's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Merrick," he echoed, the name stinging even as he spoke it. "Poor creature," Dorothea murmured, her tone laced with both sympathy and calculation. "To vanish, be declared dead, and now return a widow with a child. Society will be merciless." Christian studied her for a long, steady moment. "Society would do well to mind its own concerns." She lifted her brows slightly. "To expect that is to expect far too much, is it not, Your Grace?" He gave no answer, because she was right. He turned. "If you'll excuse me." He set his glass back on a passing tray and left before she could speak again. The terrace offered cold salvation. Snow fell heavier now, coating the gardens, the sculptures, the dark surface of the lake. The air cut into his lungs, bringing with it a harsh kind of clarity. 5 years believing she had died in that cursed train. 5 years trying to become the duke his brother never lived to be. 5 years burying a love he had never spoken aloud. "When my memory returned, you were already the duke." His eyes closed. She had known, and still she had not come back. Had she believed the title put an ocean between them? Had she feared he would never accept her as another man's widow? Or had she simply learned how to live without him? "Why didn't you return?" he whispered into the drifting snow. "Why did you stay with him?" No answer came, only wind. He remained there until his fingers numbed, until Hartwell appeared at the door. "Your Grace, Mrs. Merrick has been settled in the blue room. The boy is asleep." Christian nodded. "And she?" "Awake." Hartwell hesitated. A rarity. "She requested to see you tomorrow. She said there is something she must explain." Something tightened in Christian's chest. "Tell her I will be available after breakfast." Hartwell bowed and withdrew. Christian stayed beneath the falling snow a moment longer, watching the white spread over everything, as if it could erase the world. But the past does not vanish. It breathes, sometimes louder than we wish. He returned to the hall. The music still played, the guests still murmured, yet everything felt distant. He moved by instinct alone, answering mechanically, offering hollow smiles, performing the Duke flawlessly while inside he was little more than shadow. When the last carriage finally departed and Ravenshire Hall fell silent, Christian climbed the stairs. But he did not turn toward his own chambers. His steps led him down another corridor, to the blue room's door. He stopped before it. He pictured Clara on the other side, awake, thoughtful, perhaps watching the snow as he had earlier. He lifted his hand, almost touched the wood, almost. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would speak. Tomorrow he would listen. Tomorrow, perhaps, he would find sense in what today existed only as pain. He lowered his hand, returned to his chambers, closed the door. And he remained awake until dawn, listening to the snowfall, thinking of the woman who had survived a disaster meant to kill her, who now slept only a few steps away, so close, and yet perilously out of reach. Chapter 3. The Weight of Memory. Clara woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor. For a moment she had no idea where she was. The room was too large, the bed too soft, the silence too heavy. The high ceiling, the thick curtains, the discreet warmth of the fire, none of it was hers. Then memory returned in waves. Ravenshire Hall, the ball, the stairs, Christian, the library. She pushed herself up too quickly, heart racing, and turned her head. Oliver slept beside her, curled into the blankets, his fair hair tousled, his face softened in a peace she herself could scarcely remember having known. Clara brushed her fingertips lightly over his cheek, and the knot in her throat tightened. She should not be here. Not in this world, not in this house. But Hugh's firm handwriting came back to her like a sentence. Clara must present Oliver to English society and ensure that the child's position is recognized and his inheritance protected. Otherwise, his estate will be left vulnerable to the claims of relatives who have never shown affection for the boy. Hugh had known. He had known about the greedy cousins, the cold smiles, the hands that reached only for money. And Clara had promised, there at his deathbed, her hand wrapped around his weakening fingers, that she would protect Oliver, whatever it cost. She rose slowly and walked to the window. Snow was still falling, laying a white sheet over Ravenshire's gardens, hiding paths, statues, floors. Outside, everything looked clean. Inside, she felt nothing but ruins. 5 years. 5 years since the train derailed. The memory came as it always did, in sharp fragments. The shrill whistle, the brutal jolt, screams tangled with the roar of twisting metal, glass shattering, the world turning upside down, the smell, iron, smoke, burning fabric. She saw flames licking at the wreckage, bodies lying still on the tracks, her own bloodied hands clawing at the ground as she dragged herself out of the shattered carriage. After that, only confusion. Sky and earth trading places, pain beating in every limb, roads that led nowhere, days lost in fever and fog. She hadn't known who she was. She hadn't known where she belonged. She only walked, driven by a stubborn animal instinct to stay alive, until Hugh Merrick found her. He had told her, once the blankness of her memory began to crack, he had seen a staggering figure on the road near his estate in Gloucestershire, a torn dress, dried blood, torn feet, empty eyes. She was mumbling broken phrases, sometimes English, sometimes nothing at all. Hugh had lifted her into his arms as if she were family and carried her home, called the doctor, spent nights by her bed while she raved, refusing to leave her alone. When Clara finally woke with a clear mind 3 months later, the world was a place without names. She did not know her own, could not recall her family. There was only that room, that man of about 40, with grey at his temples and kind eyes, and a baby crying somewhere nearby. "Where am I?" she had asked, her voice hoarse. Hugh had smiled softly. "You're safe." Memory had returned like a capricious tide. First, glimmers, a bright ballroom, a smile, green eyes. Then heavier waves, a stern father, the loneliness after his death, the journey by train. At last, on a bleak morning, everything crashed back at once, the derailment, the panic, the pain. She had asked for newspapers. Hugh had brought a stack. Railway tragedy. Dozens dead. On a shorter list, she found her own name, Miss Clara Whitcomb, presumed dead. Her hands had trembled as he set another paper in her lap. Duchy of Ravenshire in mourning, heir dies of fever. Beneath, in smaller print, Christian Ravenshire, second son, assumes the title. Christian, now the Duke, his brother gone, and she, dead as well, for all the world cared. Hugh had noticed the change in her face. He sat beside her, carefully taking her hand. "You can go back if you wish," he had said gently, without pressure. "I can help you." But Clara had looked to the cradle in the corner, where Oliver, 6 months old, slept, then back to Hugh, worn and tired, but still strong enough to carry the boy in his arms. He had smiled at her with patient kindness, completely unaware of the storm tearing through her. "No," she answered, more firmly than she felt. "I can't." Going back meant facing Christian, explaining why she had vanished, why the world had mourned her, why she had not sent a single word when her memory returned, and now he was a duke, and she officially nothing. The distance between them felt too wide to cross. Hugh's illness advanced quickly. He lost weight, breath, colour. One day, with his chest heaving and his voice faint, he had asked her to marry him, to give his son a name and a home once he was gone. Clara had agreed, not out of romantic love, but out of gratitude, out of duty, out of love for Oliver. "Mama Clara," The small voice tugged her back. She turned. Oliver was sitting up in bed, brown eyes still foggy with sleep, hair sticking out in every direction. Her heart clenched. "Good morning, sweetheart." She went to him, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "Did you sleep well?" He nodded, taking in the room with cautious curiosity. "Where are we?" Clara hesitated. How did one explain Ravenshire to a 4-year-old? "In a house where I stayed a long time ago," she said at last, choosing each word. "We'll be here for a while." "Until when?" His brow creased. "Until the cousins retreat. Until the solicitor secures the inheritance. Until I can breathe in the same room as Christian without feeling like I'm about to fall apart." "I don't know yet," she said simply. Oliver lowered his gaze. "I wish Papa were here." The tears burned, but she refused to let them fall. "So do I, my love," she murmured. "So do I." A knock sounded at the door. Clara stood, smoothing the dark dress she had worn since the night before. She opened it. A young maid in a spotless uniform dropped a small curtsy. "Good morning, ma'am. His Grace requests your presence in the breakfast room." Clara's stomach tightened. "Thank you," she answered. "I'll be there shortly." When the girl left, Clara let her forehead rest against the door for a moment and drew in a long breath. Christian wanted to speak to her. Of course he did. He had questions. Perhaps he had a right to some answers. But how could she explain that when she saw in the papers that he had become the Duke, she had felt there was no longer a place for her at his side? How could she explain Hugh, the illness, Oliver, the shame, the fear? "Mama Clara, I'm hungry." Oliver tugged at her sleeve. Clara knelt in front of him, forcing a smile. "Then we shall go down. But you must behave very well, all right?" He nodded with solemn seriousness. "I'll behave." She dressed him, tried to tame his hair with her fingers, then adjusted her own appearance in the small mirror. There wasn't much to be done. Still, she lifted her chin. Hand in hand, they went down the stairs. In daylight, Ravenshire Hall seemed even larger. Thick carpets swallowed their footsteps. Portraits of ancestors watched from gilded frames. Crystal chandeliers held the last echoes of the previous night. Every detail whispered that she did not belong here. Even so, she kept walking. She followed the smell of fresh bread and coffee to a half-open door. Drawing a breath, she squeezed Oliver's hand and stepped inside. The breakfast room was bright, tall windows admitting the pale winter light. A long table, delicate china, polished silver. Christian sat at the head, a newspaper open before him. He looked up as she entered. For a heartbeat, no more, Clara saw something raw in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or exhaustion. Then his expression settled back into flawless composure. "Mrs. Merrick," he said formal, "please sit down." Clara guided Oliver to a nearby chair and took the one beside his. A footman approached with trays. The boy watched the parade of breads, jams, eggs, and fruit, with a kind of reverent silence, only reaching out when she served his plate. Christian folded the newspaper with precise motions and laid it aside. "I trust the room was comfortable," he said, without embellishment. "It was," she replied. "Thank you." The silence that followed seemed to fill the room more completely than the furniture. His gaze shifted to Oliver. "Does he resemble his father?" Clara swallowed. Hugh deserved more than to be reduced to an awkward shadow in conversation. "Yes," she answered gently, "in many ways." "And Hugh Merrick's relations," Christian went on, "do they accept the situation?" Her chest tightened. "No," she said plainly. "They want custody of Oliver. And everything that comes with it." This time Christian met her eyes directly. "And you are here to stop them." Clara held his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. "I am here because Hugh's will requires that I present Oliver to society and make certain he is not stripped of what is his." She kept her voice as steady as she could. "I need time and a safe place." She could have said, "I need your help." She did not. Christian leaned back slowly, his fingers tapping once, twice against the wooden armrest. "And why," he asked at last, "should I help you?" The question landed like a blow. Heat rose to her face. Her hands went cold. She knew Oliver was listening. She knew every word would fall on his ears as well. "I'm not asking for favors, Your Grace," she murmured. "Only shelter, for a little while, until the legal arrangements are settled." "Shelter," he repeated, his voice rough with withheld irony. "You vanish for 5 years, let the world think you're dead, marry another man, return a widow with a child, and all you ask is temporary shelter." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I did not choose to disappear, Christian," she said quietly. He leaned forward, his gaze almost suffocating. "No? Then explain it to me." His voice dropped, turning sharper. "Explain why. When your memory came back, there wasn't a letter, a message, a single line saying, 'I am alive.'" Clara parted her lips. She wanted to tell him she had seen his name in the papers already attached to the title of Duke, distant and untouchable, that she had felt small, displaced, guilty, that Hugh was already ill, that Oliver's tiny fingers had curled around hers with the complete trust of a child who knew no one else in that house, that the shame of having stayed silent so long had grown into a wall she could no longer climb, that loving him had made every choice more painful. But Oliver was there, carefully cutting his bread beside her, and with him sitting at her elbow, any confession felt like a cruelty. "I can't," she said at last, barely above a whisper. For a moment, Christian did not move. Then he rose slowly, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape. "Then we have nothing more to discuss," he said. He turned and left the room. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that felt inside her like a crack of thunder. Clara stayed where she was, frozen, until a small hand rested on her arm. "Mama Clara?" Oliver's gaze was worried. "Did I do something wrong?" She drew a breath, blinking fast, forcing the tears back to where he could not see them. She smiled and gently smoothed his hair. "No, my love," she answered, her voice trembling with tenderness. "You did nothing wrong." She lowered her face so he would not see her expression. One single tear escaped, falling onto the immaculate linen tablecloth. Ravenshire Hall was vast, imposing, grand, and yet in that moment it had never felt so narrow. Clara knew she could not avoid that conversation forever. Sooner or later, she would have to tear open the wounds she had spent 5 years trying to keep stitched closed, or risk losing not only the man she had once loved, but the only possible future for the boy who had become her whole world. Chapter 4. Fragments of Truth. Christian locked himself in the study the moment he left the breakfast room. He did not trust himself to remain in the same space as Clara without demanding answers she clearly was not ready or not willing to give. Worse still, he did not trust himself not to say things he would never be able to take back. He sat behind the mahogany desk, the same one his father had worked at, the same one his brother had pretended to work at, and stared at the pile of correspondence. Letters from estate managers, invitations, requests for audiences, a duke's daily life. And in that moment, all of it felt pathetically trivial in the face of the simple, inescapable fact that Clara Whitcomb, Clara Merrick, was alive, breathing the same air as he was, only a few rooms away. He picked up a letter, set it down, picked up another. The words blurred before he could make sense of them. "I did not choose to disappear." Her voice rang clear and painful in his mind. Christian shut his eyes and saw her again at the breakfast table. Pale, exhausted, blue eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall in front of Oliver. She had suffered. That much was undeniable. But why had she not come back? Why had she stayed with Hugh Merrick instead of sending even a single line? "When my memory returned, you were already Duke." He opened his eyes abruptly. So that was it? She had believed the title carved an abyss between them? That he would care more about propriety and politics than about the woman whose name he had read among the presumed dead? A light knock at the door broke through his thoughts. "Come in," he said, forcing his posture back into rigid lines. Hartwell entered with a tea tray and a sealed letter. "This has just arrived, Your Grace," he announced, "from the Merrick family solicitor." Christian took it. The wax cracked beneath his fingers with a dry snap. He read quickly, but each sentence seemed brutally sharp. Improper care, interests of the child, validity of the marriage, rights of blood relations, petition for custody. Almost inevitable, he thought. Since the night before, Ravenshire had been humming with whispers, the young woman everyone believed dead appearing alive, with a child in her arms, under a duke's roof. In a county where news travelled faster than carriages, of course the Merrick family already knew. And of course their solicitors were moving with the speed of vultures who have scented advantage. His hand closed around the paper until his knuckles turned white. "They're already circling the boy's inheritance and questioning her marriage," he muttered. Hartwell did not look surprised. "The Merrick family are known for their persistence in matters of inheritance," he replied, choosing the word with care. Christian let out a short, humourless laugh. "Persistence is a very gentle word for greed." "Do they have any grounds, Your Grace?" Hartwell asked in that same even tone. Christian drew a deep breath and read again, now as a duke, not only as a wounded man. "They claim the marriage was hasty, that she influenced a dying man into marrying her to secure access to his estate," he said, his voice growing colder with each phrase. "They intend to petition for custody of Oliver on the grounds that blood relatives are more suitable guardians." He dropped the letter onto the desk. The crumpled sheet looked absurdly small to hold so much malice. "It is absurd," he concluded, "but with the wrong judge it could work." Hartwell was silent for a moment. "Does Mrs. Merrick have anyone to represent her?" he asked at last. Christian realized with a dull throb of unease that he did not know. He knew about the wreck, the amnesia, Hugh, the illness, the boy, but he had no idea how defenseless she might be against solicitors and courts. "I cannot say," he admitted. "Hugh Merrick was a respected railway investor. I imagine he left her in good hands, but I don't know whether she has been able to consult anyone yet." "Then it may be prudent to ascertain that, Your Grace," Hartwell suggested, without pressing. Christian nodded once, curt. Hartwell withdrew, leaving him alone with the letter and a slow rising anger. The Merricks did not want just money. They wanted Oliver. They wanted to wrench from the child the only safe harbour he had ever known. They wanted to strip Clara of the one miracle she had managed to keep. He would not allow it. The conclusion did not arrive with fanfare. It settled quietly, like something that had been waiting all along to be named. It did not matter what had happened these 5 years. It did not matter that she had married another man, that she had kept silent, that questions still hung unanswered between them. Clara needed protection, and Christian, Duke of Ravenshire, last surviving son, man who had never truly stopped loving her, could provide it, even if she never knew what it cost him. He rose and walked to the window. The snow had stopped, leaving the gardens blanketed in white, as if someone had laid a fresh page over the world. That was when he saw her. Clara was crouched near a buried flowerbed, helping Oliver pack snow into an uneven ball. The boy laughed, cheeks flushed red, his narrow nose pink with cold. Clara smiled, a small smile, but real. Christian's chest tightened. She still wore the dark dress, covered only by a shawl far too thin for such weather. A few strands of red hair had escaped her bun and fell against her neck. For the briefest moment from a distance, he almost saw the young woman from old ballrooms, turning beneath candlelight to the sound of violins. Almost. Oliver threw snow at her. Clara feigned outrage, scooped up a handful, and flung it back. The boy squealed with laughter and stumbled away across the garden. She chased him, slipped a little, nearly fell. Oliver ran back and clung to her legs, both of them laughing. That was when Christian saw, beyond doubt, the look she gave the child. Not duty. Not mere obligation. The expression of someone who loved fiercely, instinctively, completely. She loved him, not because of blood, because she had chosen to. The door behind Christian opened. "Hartwell," he said, without turning from the window. "Send a message to my solicitor. I want him here tomorrow by midday. We have matters to discuss regarding the custody of a child." "Very good, Your Grace," the butler replied. There was a brief pause. "Shall I inform Mrs. Merrick?" Christian watched Clara lift Oliver into her arms and spin him, loose snow falling from the branches onto them both. "Not yet," he decided. First, I want to know exactly what we can do." "As you wish." Hartwell bowed and departed. Christian remained at the window, watching the only woman he had ever loved play with a child who was not his, and understanding, with a low, persistent ache, that she had built, by sheer will, a small life far from him. Improvised, perhaps fragile, but real. And now that life was under siege. He would not let them tear it apart. He would not allow solicitors, bitter cousins, or willing judges to dismantle what she had fought alone to build, even if it meant going without the answers he so desperately wanted. The afternoon dragged. Christian spent hours in the study, but everything became mechanical. He signed documents, reviewed reports, received the estate manager. He spoke, listened, decided. None of it pushed from his mind the image of Clara in the snow or the weight of the letter on the desk. When night finally settled over Ravenshire, he went down to dinner. Clara was already seated at the table, Oliver beside her. The boy swung his legs under the chair in restless rhythm until Clara laid a hand on his knee. The movement stopped at once. A small gesture, but telling. Christian took his place at the head. A servant ladled soup. Silence joined them, sitting squarely in the middle of the table. "Oliver," Clara said gently, "this is the Duke of Ravenshire. Say good evening, please." The boy looked at Christian with shy solemnity. "Good evening, Mr. Duke," he said, very serious. Something gave way quietly inside Christian. He managed a faint smile. "Good evening, Oliver," he replied. "You may call me sir, if you like." Oliver nodded with grave concentration and turned back to his plate. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the napkin, the cutlery, any point that was not Christian's face. He drew a steady breath. There was no use delaying. "I received a letter today from the Merrick family solicitors," he began, voice neutral but firm. Clara's head snapped up so quickly she nearly dropped her spoon. The color drained from her cheeks. "And?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "They are challenging the validity of your marriage to Hugh," he said, plain and direct. "And they intend to petition for custody of Oliver." Her hands trembled. She pulled them into her lap, out of sight. She swallowed, then forced the words out. "I was certain they would try. I just did not expect it so soon." "Do you already have someone to represent you?" Christian asked. She shook her head. "Hugh left the name of a solicitor in London," she explained. "But with the journey, the morning, Oliver, I haven't managed to contact him yet." "Then we shall begin there," Christian cut in, before panic could take hold of her. "My solicitor will come tomorrow. We will speak with him together. He will handle what needs to be done." Clara stared at him confused, as if she doubted her own understanding. "Why?" she asked at last. "Why are you doing this? Because 5 years of grief were not enough to tear you out of me. Because seeing you alive was like breathing after drowning. Because I could not stand by while they stripped you of the only piece of future you salvaged from the wreck." None of that reached his lips. "Because it is what honor demands," he said instead. "And because that boy does not deserve to become a bargaining chip in some inheritance dispute." She blinked, startled. For an instant, something lit in her face. A flicker of relief, pain, and restrained gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured. Christian only inclined his head and turned back to his plate, though he had no appetite. Between one untouched spoonful and the next, he allowed himself, from the corner of his eye, to watch Clara break bread into smaller pieces for Oliver, wipe his mouth with the napkin, lean in to whisper something he did not catch but that drew a small smile from the boy. She was already a mother. In every sacrifice, in every quiet act of care. And Christian understood, with the clean, cutting clarity of a blade, that nothing that had happened in the last 5 years changed what mattered most. She had returned with another surname, carrying secrets she could not, or would not yet, share. But it did not alter the decision taking shape in him there at Ravenshire's silent table. He would protect her and the boy, whatever it cost, against whomever he had to stand, cousins, solicitors, judges, the whole of society if needed. Because some decisions are not born of reason, but of something older and more stubborn. And loving Clara, whether she bore the name Whitcomb, Merrick, or any other the world chose to give her, had always been, for Christian Ravenshire, less a choice than a fixed, unchangeable truth, as inevitable as the snow falling night after night over Ravenshire Hall. Chapter 5. Fractures and Foundations. Clara did not sleep that night. She lay beside Oliver, listening to the boy's soft breathing, to the faint creaks of the old house, and silently repeating Christian's words at dinner. "My solicitor will come tomorrow. He will see to it." He was helping her, without demanding explanations. Without charging her the truth, she still could not bring herself to speak, and somehow that frightened her more than the Merricks' threats, because it meant Christian still cared, and Clara did not know what to do with that. She rose before dawn, dressed in the half-dark so as not to wake Oliver, and slipped down the stairs while Ravenshire Hall still slept. She needed air. The garden was bitterly cold, covered in a thin crust of snow that crunched beneath her steps. Clara drew the shawl tight around her and walked without direction, watching the house slowly wake. Smoke unfurling from chimneys, servants opening shutters, distant sounds drifting from the stables. Ravenshire Hall was magnificent. Everything Hugh's estate had never been. Hugh's home had possessed its own quiet dignity, of course, but from the moment she arrived at Ravenshire, Clara had felt the gulf between the modest life she'd led by Hugh's side and the world she was now stepping back into. She had never quite belonged here, not even as the insignificant baronet's daughter, and certainly not now. "You're up early." The voice turned her around. Christian was walking toward her, dressed for riding, boots, dark coat, gloves in one hand. His hair was still damp, shadows of sleeplessness beneath his eyes. "I couldn't sleep," Clara said, making no attempt to pretend otherwise. He nodded once. "Neither could I." The silence between them was taut but not hostile. Clara turned her gaze to the white horizon, to the snow-laden trees. Even then, she felt him like a presence at her back. "The Merrick solicitors are relentless," Christian said at last. "They'll use any argument to question your ability to care for Oliver. I need to know what we're up against." "Of course. Facts, not feelings." "The marriage was legitimate," Clara answered, gathering her voice. "There was a vicar, a registry, witnesses. Hugh was ill but lucid. He knew what he was doing." "And Oliver?" His tone was practical, not accusing. "Is his paternity beyond dispute?" Clara turned toward him, stung despite knowing the question was necessary. "Hugh was Oliver's father," she said, steady and clear. "By blood. Oliver was born of his first marriage. His mother died in childbirth. I came to the house a few months after." Christian lifted both hands slightly, a gesture of peace. "I'm not doubting you," he said. "I just need to anticipate what they'll claim." Clara drew a deep breath. He was right. The Merricks would question everything: the marriage, Hugh's health, her intentions, the way she raised the boy. "Hugh left letters," she said at last, "explaining why he wished to marry me, saying Oliver needed protection from the cousins." "Where are those letters?" Christian asked. "With the solicitor Hugh named in London," she replied. Christian nodded. "We'll have them brought here." A brief pause. "And I'll need you to tell me everything you can about Hugh. How you met. What your marriage was like. What he said before he died. Anything that might be used in your favor." Telling it meant reliving it. The road, the fevered rambling, the gratitude, the sound of Hugh's cough echoing through the house in those last days. "I don't know if I can," she murmured. "You'll have to." He stepped closer. She had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. "If you don't tell me, we'll be walking in blind. And the Merricks will not hesitate to tear you apart." There was no cruelty in his gaze, only a hard, practical clarity. The truth, without adornment. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. "Why are you doing this, Christian?" she asked, before she could stop herself. "Why do you truly care?" He went very still. For a moment she thought he would shut down, wall himself off. But when he spoke, his voice was low, roughened at the edges. "Because I spent 5 years thinking you were dead," he said. "And now that you're alive, I will not stand by and watch them strip you of what little you have left." The words settled between them with unexpected weight. "Strip you of what little you have left." Not strip Oliver, not strip a struggling widow. Strip you. Christian, Clara began, but everything that should have followed felt too large to fit into speech. He ran a hand through his hair, breaking the moment. "The solicitor will arrive at midday," he said, stepping back. "I ask that you be prepared." He turned and walked toward the stables. Clara remained in the garden, shivering less from the cold than from something she could not name. She went back inside. The house was fully awake now, servants crossing corridors, the smell of bread and coffee, voices drifting from the kitchens. Clara climbed the stairs. She found Oliver still asleep, face relaxed, one small hand resting outside the blanket. She sat on the edge of the bed and watched him. "I will not stand by and watch them strip you of what little you have left." Christian hadn't spoken only of courts and petitions. He had spoken like a man who still counted her among the things that mattered. He still felt something for her, and heaven help her, she still felt something for him. Oliver stirred, rubbed his eyes, and smiled. "Good morning, Mama Clara," he mumbled. She swallowed down everything storming inside her and smiled back. "Good morning, my love. Shall we go down for breakfast?" The rest of the morning passed under the pressure of waiting. Clara dressed, fed Oliver, tried to play with him, but her thoughts kept circling back to the questions she would have to answer. In her mind she arranged the facts: the road, Hugh, the illness, the letters, the proposal, the fear of the cousins. She separated what belonged to a courtroom from what belonged only to the heart. At midday Hartwell came for her. "The solicitor has arrived, madam," he announced. "His Grace requests your presence in the study." Clara left Oliver with a kindly-eyed maid and went downstairs. She tapped lightly on the half-open door. "Come in," Christian's voice called. She entered. The study was large, lined with shelves. The heavy desk dominated the center of the room. Christian stood beside an older man with graying hair, thin spectacles and ink-stained fingers. "Mrs. Merrick," the man said, bowing his head. "Edmund Thorpe, at your service. His Grace has given me a general sense of your situation." Clara glanced briefly at Christian. He made a small, steadying gesture. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thorpe," she said. "Please sit," he replied, indicating a chair before the desk. "We must set the facts in order." Clara sat. Christian stayed on his feet, leaning subtly against the desk, arms folded. Thorpe opened a leather folder, readied pen and paper. "We'll begin with the marriage," he said, brisk but not unkind. "When and where was it performed?" "May of 1844 at St. Mary's Church in Gloucestershire," Clara replied. "The vicar was John Alcott." A quick scratch of ink. "Witnesses?" "Hugh's physician, Dr. Samuel Garrett, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Hadley. Both still live in the village." "Excellent," Thorpe murmured. "We'll need them." "And Hugh Merrick's condition at the time?" "Lung disease," she answered. But his mind was clear. We talked, made plans. He knew exactly what he was doing when he decided to marry. "The Merricks will claim he was too weakened to make sound decisions," the solicitor observed. "We'll require Dr. Garrett's testimony regarding his mental clarity." "He will confirm it," Clara said, more firmly now. "Hugh remained lucid almost until the end." Thorpe studied her a moment. "Forgive the bluntness, madam, but the court will also ask, why precisely did Hugh choose to marry you at that time? We'll need a clean answer." Heat rose to her face. She was acutely aware that Christian could hear every word. "Because Oliver needed someone," she said at last, "and because I owed Hugh my life." "You owed him?" Thorpe repeated. She drew a steadying breath. "He found me on a country road days after the train wreck," she said, her tone calm by force. "I had collapsed. I was injured, without memory, lost. He brought me to his estate. He cared for me. When my memory returned, he offered to help me go back to the life I'd had before, but Her gaze fixed on a neutral point in the room. "I did not go back." "Why?" Christian's voice cut through the air. Clara lifted her eyes to his. "Because everything I'd left behind seemed to have vanished," she said, the words dragging. "My father was gone. My name was on a list of the dead. And when I read that you had become Duke, I believed—" She swallowed. "I believed the world we'd known no longer existed. Hugh was dying. Oliver was a baby. They needed someone. And I thought you—" She did not finish. Christian turned his face away, his expression tightening. Thorpe stepped in, brisk and practical. "The Merricks will argue that you took advantage of Hugh's condition to secure your livelihood," he said. "How shall we counter that?" "With his own words," Clara replied, sitting straighter. "Hugh left letters explaining it was his idea, that he feared what the cousins would do to Oliver. They're with the solicitor he appointed in London." Thorpe wrote down the name and address. "Very good," he said at last, closing the folder. "I'll obtain those letters and begin drafting our petition." He turned to Christian. "I'll depart today if your grace permits." "You have my permission," Christian replied. "Do whatever must be done." The solicitor bowed and left, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed felt heavier now that they were alone. Christian remained turned toward the unlit fireplace for several seconds. "You said everything was gone," he said at last. "That there was no reason to come back." He didn't sound accusatory, just like a man who needed to hear the words again. "Yes," Clara answered. He turned to face her slowly. "I was alive, Clara," he said, with a raw honesty in his green eyes. "I was here, and for months I rode roads and walked hospital corridors looking for you." The words struck a place that had already been aching. Clara stood. Her legs felt unreliable beneath the weight of her skirts. "When my memory returned, you were already a duke," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "And I was no one. A woman the world had already buried. How could I simply appear at your door and say I had survived, that I'd lived under another man's roof, that I'd taken his name?" Her voice faltered. "How could I look at you and admit that—" She stopped. The rest seemed too vast to fit into the room. Christian took a step toward her. "Admit what, Clara?" he asked softly. She parted her lips, but what rose up, old love, guilt, loyalty to the dead, fear of what lay ahead, was too wide, too tangled. She shook her head, unable to say it. He stood there, breathing in short, contained measures. Then, as if gathering everything back behind his ribs, he drew away. "Get some rest," he said, his voice returning to that controlled, ducal calm. "Tomorrow will be a long day." He turned and left, closing the door behind him. Clara remained on her feet for a few breaths, listening to the echo of his steps fade down the corridor. Then she let herself sink back into the chair. The tears came at last, silent and unstoppable. She wept for Hugh, for Oliver, for Christian, for the years in which she had been another woman in another house, for all the versions of herself left buried in the wreckage of a train. And most of all, she wept for the girl she had been before all of it, the one who had danced in a candle-lit ballroom under the gaze of a second son who was never meant to be a duke, and who now stood ready to face the world for her. Too late to go back to what they had been, and yet perhaps just in time for something she did not dare to name. Chapter 6. The Price of Protection. Christian rode to the far edge of the estate with no real destination, driven only by the need to move, to put distance between himself and the study where he had left Clara in tears. The horse cut through the snow in a steady gallop, but not even the speed loosened the knot coiled tight inside him. How could I come back and say I survived, that I married another man, that I built a life without you? Her words chased him. Worse still was what had broken off unfinished, that a sentence left hanging, hammering through his thoughts like a promise snapped in two. What had she been unable to say? He pulled the reins near the frozen lake. The horse snorted clouds of white into the frigid air. Christian drew in a deep breath, letting the burn of the cold bite at his lungs. The pain was simple at least, easier to bear than everything else. He was tired of pretending it did not matter. Tired of the mask of the unshakable Duke, tired of loving a woman who seemed determined to raise walls between them, but he could not walk away. Not now. He turned the horse back toward the house as the winter sun began its slow descent. When he stepped into the front hall, Hartwell was already waiting. "Your Grace, an urgent dispatch from London has arrived," the butler announced. Christian recognized the seal of the courts before he even broke it. He tore the wax red and felt heat surge through him, sharp and furious in the middle of all that cold. The Merricks had already filed a formal petition for custody, hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He crushed the letter in his fist. "Has Thorpe left?" he asked, clipped. "Yes, Your Grace. He departed for London about an hour ago to deal with the documents Mrs. Merrick mentioned." Christian nodded once and climbed the stairs. As he turned into the corridor leading to the Blue Room, his steps slowed. The door was only slightly ajar. Voices drifted out, Clara's soft tone, Oliver's laughter. He moved closer, and before he could talk himself out of it, glanced through the narrow opening. Clara sat on the bed with Oliver curled in her lap, an illustrated book open before them. Her red hair was loose around her shoulders. The dark dress made her look almost translucent in the lamplight. There was tiredness in her face, but when the boy pointed at a picture, she smiled. Small, tender, completely genuine. "That's a lion, darling," she explained. "It lives very far away in places where it's very hot." "Hotter than here?" Oliver asked solemnly. Clara laughed. "Much hotter. I want to see a lion. Maybe one day. But for now you need to sleep. Tomorrow we have many things to sort out." Oliver yawned and burrowed deeper against her. "Mama Clara?" "Yes?" "That man, the Duke. Is he good?" Clara hesitated. Christian saw the pause, brief but unmistakable, and something tightened in his chest. "Yes," she said at last. "He is a good man. Will he send us away?" She pulled him closer. "No, he is helping us." "Why?" Good question, Christian thought. "Because good men help when they can," Clara answered. Oliver seemed content with that. He closed his eyes. Clara kept holding him, humming a lullaby Christian did not recognize. He stayed there, unmoving. She was a patient, gentle mother. Oliver adored her, and the Merricks wanted to rip that away. They would hand the boy over to relatives who had barely spared him a thought while his father lived. No, Christian thought with cold, perfect clarity. That I will not allow. He withdrew quietly and returned to his own rooms. He ordered a bath, washed away the grit of the ride, dressed, then sat before the fire. Flames rose and fell in the grate while his mind began to assemble its lines of attack. The Merricks had an aggressive solicitor and influence of their own. He had more, a title, connections, resources, Hugh's letters, which Thorpe would bring, and the truth, a man who had married to protect his son, a woman who had accepted out of duty and gratitude. But truth, in a courtroom, was never quite enough, not when widows and inheritances were involved. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Hartwell entered with a tray. "Mrs. Merrick has chosen to dine upstairs with the boy, Your Grace. I thought you might wish to do the same here." Only then did Christian realize he had not eaten since breakfast. "Thank you, Hartwell." The butler set the tray down, but lingered a moment. "If I may, Your Grace," he began. "Go on." "The lady appears exhausted, but resolute," Hartwell said. "And she guards the boy with a determination that reminds me somewhat of Her Excellency, your mother." A flicker of memory surfaced, his mother small and delicate, yet immovable when it came to her children. "Yes," he murmured, "there is something of her in Mrs. Merrick." Hartwell hesitated once more. "And if I may be even bolder, Your Grace watches her much as your father once watched the Duchess, with the same sort of attention." Christian felt his shoulders tense. "Hartwell, I beg your pardon," the butler said quickly, bowing, and withdrew before Christian could rebuke him. Christian was left alone with the comparison echoing in the quiet. As his father had watched his mother, with devotion and inevitability, he ate out of obligation, drank a little wine. Later, passing the Blue Room again, he slowed. The door was fully closed now, the silence complete. Oliver would be asleep. Clara was likely lying awake in the dark, thinking it all through piece by piece. Christian laid his hand against the wood and closed his eyes. He wanted to knock, to go in, to tell her that no matter what the Merricks tried, she would not face this alone. To tell her he had loved her once, that he loved her still, that time had not altered that stubborn truth. But he did not knock. She was vulnerable. He would not have her pushed toward him by fear or gratitude. He wanted her to choose. If she ever did. He drew his hand back and returned to his own chamber. Sleep never came. Instead, as the sky lightened by degrees, he rose and went to the study. While the house was still waking, he began to write. One letter to a judge he knew in Cambridge, another to an old friend of his father's with influence in legal circles, another to Reverend Alcott, requesting a formal statement about the wedding at St. Mary's, another to Dr. Garrett, asking for a written account of Hugh's mental clarity. He would use everything, every connection, every thread of influence. Hartwell entered with tea. "Your Grace, Mrs. Merrick asks if she may speak with you." His heart clenched in a reflex he despised. "Show her in." Clara appeared a moment later, the same dark dress, the same simple hairstyle, but her eyes were steadier. "Good morning, Your Grace. I need to ask a favor," she said. "Go on." "Clothing," she said, dropping her gaze a little. "For myself and for Oliver, we brought very little, and if there is to be a hearing, we must look presentable." Something twisted in his chest. It wasn't only the request, it was the exposed vulnerability beneath it. "I'll send for a dressmaker today," he replied. "Oliver will have what he needs as well." "That isn't necessary, "It is," he cut in, firm. "If we're going to stand against the Merricks, every detail matters. Documents, witnesses, appearance. I don't intend to give them comfort in the courtroom or outside it." Clara swallowed, then nodded. "Thank you." She didn't leave at once. She bit her lower lip, a small habit he remembered from long-ago balls. "Is there something else?" he asked, his voice softer. "Yesterday in the study," she began, "you asked what it was I couldn't admit." He went very still. "I still can't say it," she confessed, "but I want you to know I am grateful, truly, for what you're doing, for protecting Oliver, for not treating me as so many would." It wasn't what he wanted to hear. He wanted whatever had been trapped behind her unfinished, But he took what she offered. "There's no need to thank me," he said. She gave a faint, melancholy smile. "I think there is," she answered. "Not everyone would open this house to us." Then she left. He returned to his letters until his fingers ached from writing. When Thorpe came back from London late that afternoon, carrying a bundle of documents tied with ribbon, Christian nearly snatched them from his hands. He sat before the fire and unfolded Hugh's letters. The handwriting was firm, though the ink wavered in places. "I marry Clara not out of youthful infatuation, but out of necessity and conviction. She has brought back to this house a peace I believed lost. I know Oliver will be safe with her when I am gone. Those who know me understand this choice is mine, made freely. In another, my cousins will see self-interest where there has been only duty. Protect her. She is more honourable than all of us together." It was more than Christian had dared to hope for, and yet reading it hurt. Hugh had known a version of Clara he himself had never seen, the woman in the smaller house, with a baby on her hip and illness lurking in every corner. The Clara who sat awake through the night, who signed household accounts, who held a home together with quiet hands. Perhaps what she had felt for Hugh was a different kind of love, built from gratitude, shared days, sacrifice. Perhaps to her, Christian was nothing more than a past that still hurt. Even so, he would protect what she had now. Not because he expected anything in return, not because winning in court would earn him a place in her heart, but because somewhere between the derailed train, the list of the dead, and the Blue Room at Ravenshire, a decision had settled inside him. He would not let the world strip from Clara more than life had already taken. Some loyalties do not need to be returned to be real, and his, for her and for the little boy sleeping in the Blue Room, was one of them. Chapter 7. The Courage of Silence. The dressmaker arrived the next morning with 2 assistants and trunks full of fabrics, ribbons and lace. The room suddenly felt too small for so many choices. "Stand straight, if you please," the woman murmured, introducing herself as Madame Lavelle with a faint French accent and sharp, measuring eyes. "Shoulders, waist—" She pinched the fabric gently at Clara's bodice. Not bad at all, madam. We only need to make you look a little less like a ghost and a little more like someone alive." Clara flushed. "Nothing too striking," she said. "Just appropriate." Madame Lavelle raised one eyebrow. Appropriate for what, madame? For funerals or for living? Clara blinked, caught without an answer. The modiste sighed and studied her as though considering a complicated commission. His Grace was very clear, she said matter-of-factly. You require gowns that show respectability, not repentance. Discreet mourning, yes. Self-immolation, no, you understand? Clara did understand. Christian had thought of the hearing, the judges, the impression she would make, down to the hem of her dress, and somehow that both hurt and comforted her. Moss green, Madame Lavelle decided, holding a piece of fabric near Clara's face. And navy, perhaps a deep grey. No more black from head to toe. You are a widow, not a cloistered nun. Clara let herself be measured, turned, wrapped in swatches of cloth. She felt exposed, but also cared for. When Madame Lavelle finally finished and promised to return in 3 days with the first gowns, Clara was left alone facing the mirror. The shadows beneath her eyes were still there. The pallor, too. But behind them lay something different, a flicker of resolve. Maybe it was only the result of being treated as a woman who still had a future, not just a past. Oliver needed her strong, and Christian at least deserved clarity. She went down to luncheon. Christian was already at the table, a letter open in front of him. He looked up as she entered. Was the dressmaker satisfactory? He asked. She was, Clara replied, taking her seat. She said you were very clear in your instructions. One corner of his mouth lifted. Madame Lavelle is efficient and inconveniently honest, he said, but discreet, that is what matters. Have you hired her before? Clara ventured. The widow of my brother mentioned her once, he answered. Before my brother... The sentence trailed off. His expression closed. I didn't know he was married, Clara murmured. It was a brief marriage, Christian said, returning his attention to his soup. She chose to return to her family after his death. The silence that followed was thick with things unsaid. Clara took a sip, hardly tasting it. Christian, she said at last. He raised his eyes. Why are you doing all this? She asked, more bluntly than she intended. Solicitors, letters, the dressmaker, this house. I only needed a place to stay. You owe me nothing. He set his spoon down with deliberate calm. This is not about a debt, he said. Then what is it about? She pressed. He studied her for a long moment. In his eyes she saw weariness, hurt, and something she had not truly let herself see since before the wreck. It is about not being able to do otherwise, he said at last. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Clara felt her heart stumble. I don't understand, she whispered. Yes, you do, he countered more gently. You're only afraid to admit it. Her hands trembled against the napkin. He was right. She did know what she saw in his gaze. She knew what her own heart did when he said her name, but admitting it meant risking everything, and she had survived 5 years by learning not to risk. I can't, she said, barely audible. Can't. His voice softened further. Or won't. She met his eyes. Both, she answered. A muscle worked in his jaw, but he only inclined his head. Very well, he said quietly. I won't press you. He rose, laying the napkin beside his plate. Thorpe will come tomorrow to prepare you for the hearing, he said. Rest today if you can. He left her there alone with the cooling soup and a heart too full. Guilt, fear, gratitude, want, love, all crowding the same fragile space. The afternoon dragged. Clara took Oliver out to the garden, helped him build lopsided snowmen, laughed at his earnest attempts to make perfectly round eyes out of stones. But behind the laughter, Christian's words returned. It is about not being able to do otherwise. What did that mean? Love, duty, simply character? She didn't know, and feared discovering the answer only to find she could not match it, or would match it too completely. That night, after helping Oliver say his prayers and settle into bed, Clara lingered at the window, looking over the moonlit grounds. The snow, silvered by the pale light, turned Ravenshire into something almost unreal. Then she saw him. Christian was walking near the lake, hands in his pockets, shoulders rigid. No music, no laughter, no company, just a dark figure against the white. He looked terribly alone, and Clara could not help thinking that her return and her silence had a share in that. She could not promise to mend everything. She did not know if she could give him what he seemed to want, but she could at least give him the truth. She took up her shawl, wrapped it around her shoulders, slipped out of the room and down the stairs. The house was nearly at rest. A drowsy servant pretended not to see her as she took the side passage toward the door. The cold struck her like a slap. Still, she went on. Christian stood at the edge of the lake when she approached. He did not turn, but spoke as though he had felt her presence. "You shouldn't be out here." "It's far too cold." "So are you," Clara replied, stopping beside him and pulling the shawl tighter. "And yet, here you are." A tired half-smile touched his mouth. Fair point. For a few moments, they simply watched the moon's reflection on the ice. "I wanted to explain," Clara said at last. Her voice shook, but she did not retreat. "Why I didn't come back when my memory returned." "You don't need—" "I do," she cut in. "You deserve to know." He turned his face toward her. "Then tell me," he said simply. Clara drew a steadying breath. "When I woke in Hugh's house, I had nothing," she began. "No name, no past. He gave me a room, food, patience. He stayed by me when I couldn't even tell him who I was." He listened without a word. "When memory came back, it came in fragments," she went on. "A ballroom, music, my father. Then everything at once. The train, the noise, the fear. I asked for newspapers. I saw my name on a list of the dead. I read about your brother's death. I saw that you were the Duke." She swallowed. "All at once it felt as though the world we'd known had ended. You were no longer the free second son. I was no longer merely a baronet's daughter. You were a duke. I was officially dead." "And Hugh?" Christian asked quietly. "He offered to help me go back," she said. "But he was ill. Oliver was a baby. The cousins were circling, and I—" Her gaze dropped to the glittering ice. "I loved you," she said at last in a whisper, "and loving you made everything infinitely harder." Christian did not move. "I did not want to drag scandal to your door. It seemed easier to remain dead," she went on, her voice fraying, "than to appear and say, 'I survived. I lived under another man's roof for months. I gave my name to his child. And still, I could not forget you.'" Silence fell, heavy and raw. "Clara," he began hoarsely. She lifted a hand. "Then Hugh worsened," she said. "Oliver needed me. There was no one else to stay with him. The Merricks saw him as a fortune, not a child. Staying felt like the only honorable choice. Coming back felt like selfishness, abandonment." He stepped closer. "Do you truly believe I would have seen you on my doorstep and turned away?" he asked softly. "That all those months of searching were whim?" She looked up, tears bright in her eyes. "I didn't know what I was to you," she confessed. "A memory, a disappointment. Nothing? I was afraid to find out." He breathed in slowly. "I've spent 5 years trying to bury a feeling that refuses to be buried," he said at last. "I didn't come to this lake by accident." Her breath hitched. "I loved you before the wreck," he went on. "I loved you while I searched for you. I loved you while I tried to believe you were dead. I was going to ask you to marry me. And now that you're here, alive, I don't know how to do anything else." A small sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. "It isn't fair," she murmured. "Fair or not, it is true," he replied. Without quite realizing it, she stepped toward him and laid a hand on his arm. "I can't promise you anything more than the truth," she said, each word costing effort. "And the truth is that I never stopped feeling. But I have, Oliver. I have a hearing. I am afraid of losing everything." He glanced down at her hand, then back at her face. "Then only say that," he murmured, "that you never stopped. The rest we leave for after the hearing." The chasm before her was clear. The cold safety of silence, the burning risk of admission. Clara drew in one more breath. "I love you," she said, barely a sound. "I always have." His eyes closed briefly, as if he needed a heartbeat to take that in. When he opened them again, there were hope and fear there, and a tenderness that almost hurt to see. He lifted his hand and touched her cheek with exquisite care. "Then, for now, we stay with that," he said. "You love me, I love you. We must protect a child and face a court. The rest we'll see to afterward, if there is anything left. If you still want it." She nodded, tears cooling on her lashes. He bent toward her slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. He kissed her. The kiss was brief, restrained, more promise than surrender. A touch that said, "I am here without demanding anything yet." Clara answered it, acutely aware of the empty garden, of Oliver asleep upstairs, of everything she stood to lose. When they parted, both were breathing a little harder. "We should go back," Christian said finally. "For your sake, and for Oliver's. I won't hand the Merricks any more weapons than they already have." "Sensible, even in romance," she murmured. "I cannot afford not to be," he answered, with a faint, crooked smile. They walked back to the house side by side, not touching, yet each step keenly aware of the other's nearness. At the side door, he paused. "We will win this hearing," he said quietly. "For Oliver, and for you." "And after?" she asked, risking the question. He hesitated only a moment. "Afterward we'll see what remains in us that is still whole," he said. "And if there is enough, perhaps we build something new." It was no grand, sweeping promise. Perhaps that was why it felt real. Clara climbed the stairs feeling strangely lighter, not because the problems had vanished, they had not, but because for the first time in 5 years, the weight of what she felt was not hers alone to carry. That night, as she lay beside Oliver, the fear was still there, yet threaded through it was something else obstinate and fragile. Hope. And while the snow began to fall again outside, softly veiling Ravenshire Hall, Clara allowed herself to believe, just a little, that perhaps there was a way back, not to the life she had lost, but to a life where love and duty might cease to be fractures and become foundations. Chapter 8. The Heart's Verdict. Christian woke with the strange sensation that the world had shifted. It took only a moment to remember. The frozen lake, the cutting cold, Clara's face in the moonlight, that restrained kiss, and, above all, the words he had never expected to hear. "I love you. I always have." He brought a hand to his face and realized he was smiling. He could not recall the last time he had woken like this. Clara loved him. Perhaps she had always loved him. And for the first time since the accident, that feeling was no longer a weight he carried alone. Reality, however, pulled him back. The hearing was that day. Thorpe had returned from London with everything in order: letters, sworn statements, the names of judges and witnesses. Even so, Christian knew courts could be capricious, especially when fortunes, children, and unprotected widows were involved. He could not fail. Not when failure meant Oliver in the Merricks' hands and Clara undone. He dressed quickly, more from necessity than vanity, and went down to breakfast. Clara was already at the table, Oliver beside her. She wore one of Madame Lavelle's creations, moss green, sober, yet alive. Mourning was there, but it did not swallow her whole. Her red hair was neatly pinned. Her blue eyes looked brighter. Oliver sat next to her in a well-fitted little suit, his cravat slightly crooked. She lifted her gaze as he entered. There was fear there, and something like hope. "Good morning," Christian said. "Good morning," she answered softly. Then, almost shyly, "Did you sleep well?" He held her eyes a moment longer than courtesy required. "Better than I have in many years." Colour crept into Clara's cheeks. Oliver, entirely absorbed with his bread and jam, paid the adults very little attention. No one ate much. Thorpe arrived soon after, his coat still damp with snow, his leather case thick with papers. "Everything is in order, Your Grace," he reported. "The witnesses are already in London. The judge will hear them at noon. The carriage will be at the door in half an hour, Christian said. We'll leave in good time. The journey to London was long enough to unsettle, too short to truly calm. Clara sat with Oliver tucked against her. Christian sat opposite. He watched the way she bit her lip when the carriage jolted, how her hand drifted to smooth the boy's hair without thinking, how she drew in deep breaths whenever anxiety pressed too hard. She is fighting for him with everything she has, he thought, and I will fight for them with everything I am. When they reached the courthouse, dark stone, severe columns, high windows, he felt the old battle knot form in his stomach. He stepped out first and held out his hand. I'm here, he said simply. Clara looked at his hand, then at him. For an instant, her vulnerability was complete. Then she drew breath and accepted his help. Oliver followed, clinging to his mother's skirt. Inside, the street's cold gave way to the chill of marble and high ceilings. As they turned down a corridor, Clara stopped short. Two men waited ahead. One, older, white hair, carefully groomed, clothes expensive but a touch out of date, his gaze sharp. The other, younger and heavier, wore impatience and disdain like a second coat. Hugh's cousins, Clara murmured. Christian felt his blood heat. The elder cousin stepped forward. Mrs. Merrick, he said, his tone wrapping courtesy around poison. I see you are well accompanied. His eyes flicked to Christian, assessing. Mr. Merrick, Clara replied, her chin lifted. The younger cousin stared at Oliver. You brought the boy as well, he sneered. Nothing like a child's tears to soften a judge. Christian took one step forward, positioning himself between them and Clara. Mind your tone, sir, he said, quiet and ice-cold. Both men looked at him. The older narrowed his eyes. And you are? Christian Ravenshire, he replied. Duke of Ravenshire. He paused. A friend of Mrs. Merrick's. The title filled the corridor. The Merricks exchanged a brief glance. The older gave a short, stiff nod before moving off with their solicitor. Thorpe appeared almost at once. They're calling us in, he said. The hearing room was smaller than Christian had expected, and more oppressive. Dark wood, high windows leaking pale light, the judge raised above them in wig and robe. The air smelled of paper and old decisions. Case concerning the guardianship of the minor Oliver Merrick, the clerk announced. Clara sat beside Thorpe. Oliver, on a small chair between them, clung to her hand. Christian took his place just behind them, close enough to be felt, far enough to remain in his proper role. The Merrick's solicitor began. He spoke of a sick man, easily influenced, of a woman of uncertain origins who had appeared from nowhere and suddenly assumed control of house and child, of Clara's supposed lack of means, the inherent instability of a fortuneless widow. He concluded that the cousins, established gentlemen, were the natural guardians. As he spoke, Christian watched the judge. The man's face was difficult to read. He took notes, looked up now and then, frowned at certain points, but revealed very little of what he thought. When Thorpe's turn came, the room seemed to draw tighter. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he built his case piece by piece, the date of the wedding, the presence of the vicar, the doctor's testimony. Then Hugh's letters, read aloud with the judge's permission. The dead man's words filled the chamber. Deliberate choice, complete trust, fear of my cousins, Clara's honor. Hugh had made it plain that the decision was his, made with full understanding. Next came the statements of Dr. Garrett and Mrs. Hadley, confirming Hugh's lucidity and Clara's care for the boy. Finally, Thorpe stepped forward another pace. Your lordship, he said, much has been said about the child. Very little has been heard from him. I realize he is very young, but I ask leave for two simple questions, posed by your lordship, not as decisive proof, but as guidance. The judge hesitated. I do not usually hear children so young, he remarked. Precisely why I ask that the questions be few, and asked by your lordship yourself, Thorpe persisted. Another moment of silence. Very well, the judge conceded. It shall be brief. Thorpe leaned toward Oliver. Do you remember what we discussed? He whispered. Oliver nodded. The judge's voice softened. "Boy, do you know where you are?" he asked. "In a court, sir," Oliver answered seriously. Mama Clara explained. "And do you know why you've come?" Oliver looked at Clara, then at the cousins. "Because those men," he pointed without ceremony, "want to take me away from her." A ripple of sound ran through the back of the room. The judge lifted a hand for silence. "And do you wish to go with them?" he asked. "No." Oliver shook his head, certain. "I want to stay with Mama Clara. She looks after me. She loves me." Christian felt his chest tighten, as though he could feel, even at a distance, the breath catching in Clara's throat. "Did your father love you?" the judge asked. "Yes," Oliver replied at once. "And he said Mama Clara would take care of me when he went to live with God." He tightened his grip on Clara's hand. "He promised she wouldn't leave me." The judge studied him for a moment, then made a brief note. "That will suffice," he said. "The child has said enough." The Merrick solicitor tried to regain ground, muttering about planted ideas and the widow's influence. But his words now sounded harsher than persuasive, especially against the simplicity of Oliver's answers and Hugh's letters. At last, the judge drew a long breath. "I have reviewed the letters, the statements, and the arguments presented," he began. "And I have listened, as far as is reasonable, to the minor in question." Christian's heart pounded. "I find no sufficient proof to support the allegation of bad faith on the part of Mrs. Clara Merrick," the judge continued. "The documents and testimony show that Hugh Merrick was lucid when he chose to entrust his son to his wife. It is also clear that she cares properly for the child." A brief pause. "In view of this, and considering the best interests of the minor, I order that the guardianship of Oliver Merrick remain with his current guardian, Mrs. Clara Merrick." He turned to the cousins. "You may visit the boy, should you all reach an understanding, but any attempt to remove him without further ruling will be considered a violation of this decision." The gavel struck. Clara's hand flew to her mouth as she stifled a sob. Oliver stared up at her. "Is it over, Mama?" he whispered. She gathered him into her arms. "Yes, it's over. You're staying with me." Christian closed his eyes for a moment, letting relief wash the fear away. Exhaustion followed, the deep weariness of a man who has fought the right battle. The Merricks rose abruptly, faces stony. Their solicitor muttered something about appeal, but their wounded pride suggested that, for now at least, they would withdraw. Thorpe came to them. "My congratulations, madam," he said to Clara, a discreet smile touching his features. "For now the boy is safe." For now. Too sober to be comforting, but true. Rumors would spread, so would comments, but nothing they could not face. They stepped back out into the pale daylight. The snow glittered like broken glass. Oliver sagged in Clara's arms, drained. "Was it very hard?" he murmured. "It was," she answered, kissing his forehead. "But it ended well." "I won't go away from Mama Clara," he pressed. "No," Christian answered before he could stop himself. "You won't, Oliver." The boy seemed satisfied, yawned, and rested his head on his mother's shoulder. Clara lifted her gaze over Oliver's hair to Christian. The smile she gave him carried relief, gratitude, and something more. In the carriage back, Oliver fell asleep almost at once, his head in her lap. Inside, the quiet that settled was different now, lighter. Christian looked at Clara's hand resting on her knee. He took it between his own. She opened her eyes and met his. "Thank you," she said softly. "There's no need." She squeezed his fingers. "There is," she insisted. "You could have turned away. You could have decided it was the widow Merrick's problem. Instead, you used your name, your influence, your time. You saved everything I have." He held her gaze. "You gave me something in return," he said at last. "What?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. "Proof that not everything I lost was gone forever," he replied. "That," he searched for the word, "that love sometimes simply waits." Her eyes filled, but the smile that came with the tears was fragile and bright. "I don't know what the future holds for us," Clara said. "I can't promise what I don't yet understand. I only know that today, if I'm still in one piece, it is largely because of you." He leaned a little closer, almost touching his forehead to hers. then stopped, remembering curtains, servants, curious eyes. "For today, it's enough that you are here," he murmured. "You and Oliver. The rest, we'll have time to discover." She nodded, squeezing his hand once more. As the carriage rounded the last bend and Ravenshire Hall came into view, snow began to fall again, fine and steady. It no longer looked like a shroud of mourning, but the backdrop to a possible beginning. Christian glanced out the window, then back at Clara and the sleeping boy. For the first time in 5 years, he felt certain that the most important verdict of the day had not been the judge's, but the quiet judgment of the hearts involved, his, hers, and Oliver's, which clung to the promises of the adults with a simple, unguarded faith. And that, he decided silently, was a promise he would not break. Not while he had so much as a thread of strength left to keep it. Chapter 9. Reconstruction. Clara woke the next morning with a strange feeling of lightness. For a few seconds, she couldn't have said why. Then the memories returned, one by one. The hearing, the ruling, Oliver safe. The lake, the cold, the kiss, and Christian. Always Christian, no longer as a distant impossibility, but as something real, near, and promised. She turned carefully. Oliver was still fast asleep beside her, lashes resting heavy on his cheeks, small fist curled over the sheet, worn out from the past days. Outside, the snow was still falling, but the room was warm from the fire someone had kept burning through the night. Clara rose without a sound, crossed to the window and pressed her forehead to the cool glass. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself simply to feel. Relief. Gratitude. And beneath it all, a shy certainty that perhaps finally she could stop running. A soft knock at the door made her turn. She pulled her robe tighter over her nightgown. "Come in." A young maid stepped inside and dipped a small curtsy. "Good morning, ma'am. His Grace asked me to inform you that breakfast will be served in the library, if that is agreeable to you." The library. Not the formal dining room. A quieter room. More theirs. "Thank you," Clara replied. "I'll be there shortly." When she was alone again, she dressed in one of the new gowns, a simple, elegant navy, and pinned her hair into a style less severe than usual. Oliver still slept deeply. Clara asked the maid to keep an eye on him, then slipped out. Her heart beat faster with each step down the stairs. The library doors were slightly ajar, a line of warm light spilling between them. Clara drew a breath and pushed them open. Christian stood by the fireplace, without formal coat, only shirt and waistcoat. His hair was a little rumpled, as if he had given little thought to his appearance. When he turned at the sound of the door, the smile he gave her held no shadow, no restraint. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she answered, closing the door behind her, suddenly shy. "The maid said you—" "I thought we might talk," he finished for her. Away from curious eyes. He gestured toward a small table by the window, where breakfast waited, fresh bread, fruit, tea, nothing extravagant, everything welcoming. Clara took a seat. He poured her tea with an easy familiarity. "Oliver is still asleep," she said. "Let him rest," Christian replied. "Yesterday was a long day for him." "And for us," Clara murmured. She took a sip. The warmth spread through her chest. He was brave, braver than I was. "You were brave, Clara," he said at once. "Coming back, facing the Merricks, climbing those courthouse steps, standing between Oliver and what they wanted. That is courage." She lowered her eyes. It felt like nothing more than desperation. "Sometimes they are the same thing," he said simply. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but heavy with possibilities. Clara lifted her gaze. "What happens now?" she asked. Christian set his cup down with deliberate care. "That depends on you, on me. You're free now," he said, choosing his words. "Oliver is safe. The Merricks, for the moment, can't touch him. You can go back to Hugh's estate if you wish. Stay in London. Travel. Build your life wherever you think best." Something tightened in Clara's chest. "Are you sending me away?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "No," he said, leaning forward. Never. I'm saying that, for the first time in a long while, the choice is yours. And I don't want you here because you feel you must be. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. And if I choose to stay? Christian reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Then you stay, he said quietly, for as long as you wish. She drew a long breath. And you? She dared to ask. What do you want? He was silent for a moment. Then he lifted her hand and brushed a light kiss across her knuckles. I want you to stay, he said softly. Not as a guest. Not as a widow under my protection. I want you to stay with me. The room seemed to shrink until the only space that mattered was the one between them. Christian, she began, her voice unsteady. I love you, he cut in without ornament. I always have. Before the train, through all the years I believed you dead, and from the instant I saw you step into Ravenshire like a ghost that refused to stay buried. If you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that what I feel has nothing to do with titles or whispers, only with choice. The tears slipped free, and this time she did not try to stop them. Her fingers tightened around his. I choose you, she whispered, rough with emotion. I chose you at that very first ball, when you smiled at me, and I thought I'd never see anything so beautiful again. The smile he gave her then seemed to light him from within. Then we're together? He asked, almost disbelieving. Yes. Christian rose, drawing her up with him. Clara stood without resistance, and when his arms came around her, she rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. Strong, alive, real. There's something I have to ask, he murmured into her hair. She tilted her face up to him. What is it? He cradled her face in his hands, as if he wanted to be sure she was truly looking at him when she answered. Marry me. For an instant, the words didn't quite fit inside her. What? She breathed. Marry me, he repeated, calmer now. Not because you need a name or protection, not because you owe me anything, but because you love me, and because 5 years apart were already far too many. She laughed and cried at once. People will talk, she whispered. They'll say it's too soon, that it's scandalous, that I— More than they have already said about your return from the dead, he interrupted, firm. Let them talk. Society always finds something to pick apart. We've wasted enough time trying to please it. She hesitated only long enough to think of Oliver. And him? She asked. What about Oliver? Oliver needs a family, Christian said. We can be that if he wants it. The three of us. Clara touched his face as if to confirm once more that this was real. Are you certain? She whispered. You would raise Hugh Merrick's son? Absolutely, he said, resting his forehead against hers. If he matters to you, then he must matter to me. So, are you going to keep me waiting? The smile that broke over her face was the first truly full one she had given in 5 years. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The kiss that followed was nothing like the hesitant one by the lake. It carried the warmth of a promise accepted, of a beginning, of something that had survived twisted rails, grief, and snow. When they parted, Clara rested her head on his shoulder, drawing in the scent of wood smoke leather home, a scent that on its own seemed to promise shelter. When? She asked, eyes still closed. Christian threaded his fingers gently through her hair, and the tenderness of the gesture nearly undid her. Whenever you wish, he said softly. Tomorrow, a month from now, a year. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it be true. Clara breathed in slowly. It will be, she said. Truer than anything I've ever lived. Yet as she spoke, something brushed through her like a sudden whisper, more prayer than thought. Hugh. She opened her eyes and stepped back just enough to look at him. Christian, she began, hesitant. There's something I need to say. I'm still in mourning. I don't want it to seem as though I've forgotten Hugh or that I've been careless. He was a good man. He gave me a home when I had nothing. Christian lifted his hand and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. I know, he said, and I don't want you to fight that, or erase what you had with him. Hugh deserves to be honored, and you deserve whatever time you need. Her eyes shone. "Then perhaps we should wait a few months," she said. "Not many. Just enough that it doesn't look like disrespect. So I can stand at our wedding whole, not divided." A slow, deep smile curved his mouth. "Clara," he murmured, "I would wait for you another 5 years if I had to. A few months are nothing." She let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. "Thank you." He leaned his forehead to hers and closed his eyes. "Don't thank me," he said. "Loving you means making room for everything that shaped you. Hugh is part of that. I'm not afraid of your ghosts." Clara felt her heart open in a new way, steadier, safer, more complete. The fire crackled softly behind them, a quiet, constant sound, and for the first time she realized she could carry her past without losing her future. She could love Christian without erasing Hugh. She could choose and be chosen without drowning in guilt. There in the warmth of his arms she knew their beginning would be clean, honorable and true, just as she had always wanted, just as Christian had always, in his own way, promised. Epilogue. Ravenshire Hall, Christmas, 1849. Clara smoothed the moss-green silk of her gown before the mirror, her heartbeat rising in a rhythm that blended nerves with a quiet, steady peace. 1 year, only a single year, since she had crossed this very ballroom like a resurrected ghost, and yet the distance between then and now felt vast enough to measure an entire lifetime. Tonight, she would not return as a memory. Tonight, she would return as a duchess, as a wife, as a mother. Her red hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, held in place only by the pearl comb Christian had given her on their wedding day. Discreet, intimate, perfect. Clara touched the ornament with reverence, as if confirming that this new life was, in fact, real. "You look beautiful." His voice came from the doorway, warming the room more deeply than the fire behind her. Christian leaned against the frame, elegant in a dark evening coat, but it was his eyes, and always his eyes, that softened everything. Clara had learned not to fear what lived in them, love without shadows. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and for a moment the world seemed to settle around them in a gentle hush. "Nervous?" he asked, moving closer to draw her into his arms, his chin resting on her shoulder as they faced the mirror together. "A little," Clara admitted. "Society has had a full year to invent stories about us." "Let them," Christian murmured, his arms settling naturally around her waist. "None of their stories have any power over what we are." Clara covered his hands with her own. "And what are we?" He brushed a kiss to the place where her shoulder met her neck, the one touch that always undid her. "Survivors," he whispered, who found their way back to each other. Hugh's name crossed her mind, not with pain, but with quiet gratitude. "Would he be happy?" she asked softly. Christian didn't hesitate. "He wanted you to live, and you do, Clara. He would be at peace with that." She closed her eyes, letting herself believe it. "Mama! Papa Christian!" The shout echoed down the corridor a heartbeat before the door flew open. Oliver stood at the threshold, dressed formally, his once golden hair now a shade darker with age, his energy brimming over as if the world were endlessly new. Christian smiled and knelt to his height. "Ready to impress everyone tonight?" Oliver nodded enthusiastically. "Hartwell said there will be 200 people here, and can I stay up late?" "Until 8, Clara decreed, straightening his collar. "But you and Mama will dance, like at the wedding?" Christian exchanged a conspiratorial glance with her. "We will," he promised. Satisfied, Oliver launched himself down the hall like a burst of wind. Clara laughed. "He has too much energy. He's 5, Christian said, pulling her back into his arms. "And he's happy because of you." "Because of us," she corrected, and he smiled into her hair. As they descended the grand staircase together, Clara felt something that had once seemed impossible. She was at ease. She moved among guests and servants as though she truly belonged. As though Ravenshire had always been waiting for her, quietly, patiently. Christian watched her with that look that still stole her breath. Pride, tenderness, and a flicker of wonder, as if he could hardly believe she was truly his wife. The ballroom glowed. candles spilling warm light across garlands and crystal, the towering Christmas tree catching every shimmer of snow beyond the windows. Murmurs rippled as they entered, but Christian kept Clara's hand firmly in his and guided her forward like someone presenting a treasure. "My wife," he said again and again, serene, certain, unshakable, a claim that silenced any lingering malice. Lady Dorothea, now a countess, offered a graceful greeting. Thorpe lifted his glass from afar with his familiar half-smile. Oliver circled the guests with the easy confidence of a child who had found a home. Then the orchestra shifted, the first notes of a waltz unfurling across the room. Christian turned to Clara. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. She smiled, nerves fluttering. "They're all watching." "Let them watch," he said, leading her to the center of the floor. The guests parted, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to just the two of them. They moved together in a soft, fluid rhythm, as though the years lost had been only a pause, never an ending. Clara fit against him, as if she had always been meant to. "I love you," Christian murmured, for her ears alone. Clara lifted her face to his, eyes shining. "I love you too. I always have." Outside, snow drifted over Ravenshire Hall, silent as a blessing. Inside there was warmth, music, laughter. And love. Love that had survived a derailed train, amnesia, grief, distance and silence. Love that insisted, that waited, that chose to remain alive. And now, chosen again, day after day by both of them, it promised to endure for as long as snow fell over Ravenshire, for as long as there was life, for as long as there was them.